Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Jake had been driving trucks for 15 years and he thought he'd seen everything the road had to offer. Long nights, strange people, breakdowns in the middle of nowhere. None of it fazed him anymore. But what happened on a cold Nevada night in March would change everything he thought he knew about reality. It was 3:17 a.m. when Jake's CB radio crackled to life. At first, he thought it was just another trucker checking in, maybe asking about road conditions or looking for company on the long haul through the desert. But when the voice came through, Jake's blood turned to ice. It was his own voice. Not similar, not close, his exact voice, and it was screaming. Mayday, Mayday, this is Jake Morrison on eastbound I-80, mile marker 247. My truck's been hijacked. I'm trapped in the sleeper compartment. They've got some kind of chemical cargo that's leaking. I can smell it, it's burning my lungs. Please, somebody help me before they come back. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His heart slammed against his ribs. Mile marker 247 was still 50 miles ahead of him. He was hauling electronics, not chemicals, and he sure as hell wasn't trapped anywhere. He grabbed the microphone, his voice shaking. This is Jake Morrison. I'm hearing my own transmission, but I'm not in distress. Repeat, I am not in distress. Static. Then his voice came back, ignoring him completely. The men who took my truck, they're not human. I saw their faces when they thought I was unconscious. Their eyes were black, completely black. And their skin, it looked like it was melting. They keep talking about a harvest, about collecting something from the cargo. God help me, I think they're coming back. Jake pulled over to the shoulder, hands trembling. He checked his mirrors. Nothing. Just empty desert stretching out in every direction, the highway glowing pale under the moonlight. He tried the CB again. Who is this? How do you know my name? Silence. Then, after a long pause, the voice returned. Calmer now, but somehow worse. Listen to me. Whoever's out there, don't trust the dispatcher. Olivia's been replaced. The real Olivia had a scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. This one doesn't. They're infiltrating the trucking companies, using our routes for something terrible. The cargo manifests are all lies. We're not hauling what we think we're hauling. Jake's stomach dropped. Olivia did have a scar on her left hand. He'd noticed it during his last visit to the depot. A jagged line across her palm from when she'd grabbed a broken bottle as a kid. She'd told him the story over coffee. But how could this voice know that? The transmission cut out. Jake sat there for nearly an hour, waiting for it to come back. But the radio stayed quiet, just the usual chatter of other truckers discussing fuel prices and weather. None of them seemed to have heard what Jake had just experienced. Eventually, he forced himself to keep driving, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow felt wrong. Every oncoming truck could be the one from the transmission. Over the next 3 days, Jake's life spiraled. He contacted the Nevada State Police, but they had no record of any distress calls matching his description. The depot confirmed that all their drivers were accounted for. No hijackings, no missing trucks. But Jake couldn't let it go. He started researching the landmarks his other voice had described during the transmission. A rest stop with a cactus-shaped neon sign. A water tower painted with faded motor oil ads. A mile marker vandalized with strange symbols. He found them. All of them. Real locations scattered across the Southwest. Places he'd never been to, but could now describe in perfect detail. And then came the discovery that made him question everything. Jake drove to mile marker 247 on eastbound I-80. Police had found an abandoned truck there, matching his description exactly. But the VIN didn't match any truck in the system. The cargo hold was empty except for chemical burns on the metal, as if something corrosive had eaten through it. Jake was still alive, still driving. But every night at 3:17 a.m., the voice came back. His voice, describing a nightmare version of his life. One where he'd been captured, where his truck had been used to transport something that shouldn't exist, where he was screaming for help that would never come. "They're using the trucks to transport something that isn't supposed to be here," the voice explained one night, clearer than ever. "The cargo looks normal on the manifests, but it's alive. It moves when you're not looking. It whispers in languages that hurt to hear. And it's changing the drivers, one by one." Jake started noticing things. Other truckers he'd known for years seemed different. Their eyes had a glassy, distant quality. They spoke in flat monotones about their routes, their cargo. When Jake tried to joke around or talk about their families, they just stared at him blankly before walking away. He stopped going to truck stops. Started sleeping in his cab at remote locations where he could see anyone approaching from miles away, installed extra locks, kept a baseball bat within reach. The paranoia consumed him. Then came the call from Olivia. She needed him to pick up an urgent shipment from a warehouse outside Las Vegas. The address led him to an industrial complex surrounded by high fences and security cameras. The cargo manifest listed medical supplies, but when Jake arrived at the loading dock, something was wrong. The workers moved with that same glassy-eyed efficiency he'd seen in other truckers. They didn't speak, just communicated through hand signals and grunts. The cargo containers were sealed with locks that seemed to pulse with their own internal light, and Jake could swear he heard something moving inside them. When he tried to inspect the manifest more closely, one of the workers grabbed his wrist. The grip was inhuman, strong enough to leave bruises that lasted for weeks. "You don't need to know what's inside," the worker said, voice like grinding metal. "Just drive to the destination. Don't stop for anything. Don't open the cargo hold. Don't listen to the radio. And whatever you do, don't look in your mirrors after midnight." Jake wanted to refuse, wanted to run, but his body wouldn't respond. It was like he was watching himself from a distance as his hands signed the paperwork, as his feet carried him back to the cab. Only when he was miles away did control return. That night at 3:17 a.m., the voice came back. "Jake, if you're hearing this, they've gotten to you too. The cargo you're carrying isn't medical supplies, it's eggs. Thousands of them, and they're about to hatch. You have maybe 6 hours before they break out and start looking for hosts. You need to get that truck as far from people as possible and destroy it before it's too late." Jake pulled over, ran to the back of his trailer. The containers were warm to the touch, pulsing like a heartbeat. Through the metal, he could hear something wet and sliding, something alive. "Don't open them," the voice screamed through the radio. "If you open them now, they'll imprint on you. You'll become their first host. Drive to these coordinates. There's an old mining pit filled with acid runoff. It's the only thing that can destroy them." The coordinates led Jake deep into the desert, to an abandoned copper mine filled with toxic chemicals that glowed green in the moonlight. He backed his trailer to the edge and began unhitching it, hands shaking. Strange sounds came from inside the containers, clicking, scraping, something trying to break through. Just as he released the final coupling, the containers burst open. What emerged wasn't human, wasn't animal. It was something in between, writhing masses of translucent flesh covered in rows of needle-sharp teeth, moving with intelligence and purpose. They immediately began searching for Jake. He dove into his cab and floored the accelerator, watching in his mirrors as the trailer tumbled into the acid pit. The creature's death screams were audible even over his engine, a sound like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The pit bubbled and hissed, consuming everything. But Jake's relief was short-lived. His radio crackled. "You did well, Jake." But the voice sounded different now, colder, more mechanical. But that was just the first shipment. There are dozens more trucks carrying the same cargo to cities across the country. And now that you've proven yourself capable of handling the truth, you're going to help us stop them." Jake stared at the radio in horror. "Or," the voice continued, "maybe you're not Jake at all. Maybe you're the replacement. Maybe the real Jake Morrison is still out there, trapped in another dimension, screaming through the static while you live his life." Jake looked down at his hands. Were they really his? Were his memories real, or implanted? As dawn broke over the desert, Jake Morrison, or whatever believed itself to be, Jake Morrison continued driving toward his next destination, carrying orders programmed into memories that might not be his own. And somewhere in the static between radio frequencies, the real Jake Morrison screamed for help that would never come. James had a rule: never stop at rest areas after midnight. But after 14 hours behind the wheel, hauling construction materials through the Tennessee hills, his body was shutting down. His eyes burned, his back ached, and federal regulations didn't care how paranoid you were. You had to rest. The Mountain View Rest Area wasn't on any official maps. It was one of those places veteran truckers whispered about on CB channels, a quiet spot between two ridges where you could park without being hassled. James pulled his rig into the gravel lot. The place looked forgotten. Weathered picnic tables, rusted trash cans, a single flickering street light that barely pushed back the darkness, and one other vehicle. A beat-up pickup truck sat at the far end of the lot, covered in leaves and dust like it had been there for days. One door hung slightly open. James's instincts prickled, but he told himself he was just being paranoid. Probably someone's abandoned vehicle. Maybe they'd gotten a ride home and planned to come back for it later. He finished his post-drive inspection and was heading back to his cab when he decided to check on the truck. Maybe someone needed help. "Hello? Anyone need assistance?" No answer. As James got closer, he saw dark stains on the driver's seat. They looked like dried blood. His breath caught. That's when he saw the man, standing at the edge of the parking lot, barely visible in the flickering light. Tall, gaunt, wearing dirty coveralls that hung loose on his skeletal frame. Long, greasy hair fell around a face James couldn't quite make out, and in his right hand he held a pipe wrench. Easily 2 feet long, with dark stains along the metal. The man wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. James' first instinct was to offer help. "Hey there, you having car trouble?" The man didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that James had spoken, just kept staring with eyes that reflected the streetlight like an animal's. The silence stretched on. James could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "Okay, well, if you don't need help, I'll just head back to my truck." James took a step backward. The man moved. Without warning, he lunged forward with impossible speed. The pipe wrench raised above his head. A sound escaped his throat, part scream, part animal growl. His face, now visible in the light, was a mask of rage and madness. James's military training kicked in. He spun and ran toward his truck, the man's footsteps pounding behind him. The howling followed. Inhuman, horrible. The wrench whistled past James's head, missing by inches and slamming into the side of his truck with a deafening clang. The impact left a significant dent. James threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, fumbling for the lock. The man began pounding on the door with a wrench, each blow sending vibrations through the cab and spider-webbing the safety glass. James tried to start the engine, but his hands were shaking so badly he kept missing the ignition. The pounding continued, relentless, rhythmic, like the man wasn't human at all, but some kind of machine designed for violence. Finally, the engine roared to life. James threw the truck into gear and lurched forward. In his rear-view mirror, he saw the man standing in the parking lot, still holding the wrench, watching him leave. Even as the distance grew, that figure remained motionless, somehow more menacing in his stillness than he'd been in motion. James drove non-stop for 50 miles, his heart pounding, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. When he finally felt safe enough to stop at a well-lit truck stop, he called the Tennessee State Police. The dispatcher took his report seriously, promised to send a patrol car to investigate. 3 hours later, they called him back. "Sir, we found the rest area, exactly as you described. We found the pickup truck, too. Registered to a Harold Wickham, age 67, reported missing by his family 3 weeks ago. We found evidence of a struggle inside the vehicle. Blood spatter that suggests foul play, but there's no sign of the man you described." James felt ice slide down his spine. "Officer, you need to check the woods around that rest area. I have a feeling you're going to find more than one missing person." The investigation uncovered 7 bodies, 7 people buried in shallow graves throughout the surrounding forest. All of them had stopped at the Mountain View rest area over the past 2 years. The killer was never found. Despite an extensive manhunt involving multiple agencies and tracking dogs, he simply vanished. The rest area was eventually closed, the access road barricaded. But James knew that wouldn't stop someone like the man with the wrench. Predators like that just moved to new hunting grounds, new rest areas, new forgotten places where they could wait in the shadows for the next traveler who would make the mistake of offering help. And sometimes, late at night when James was driving through remote areas, he'd catch a glimpse of a figure standing by the roadside. His heart would race with the memory of those cold, dead eyes. He'd learned that evil could look human while being something else entirely. And by the time you realized the truth, it was usually too late to run. Danny pulled into the Moonlight Truck Plaza just outside Bakersfield around 1 a.m., exhausted from 16 straight hours hauling agricultural equipment from Phoenix to Sacramento. The place was busier than usual for a Tuesday night, at least a dozen rigs scattered across the lot like sleeping giants. Danny found a spot near the back, away from the main building but close enough to the security lights to feel safe. As he shut down his engine and began his inspection, he noticed 2 figures standing near the edge of the lot, half hidden in shadows cast by a broken streetlight. At first glance, they appeared to be having a conversation, but something about their body language was wrong. They stood too close together, movements too synchronized, like dancers in some strange choreography. The first figure was a man in his 60s wearing a stained mechanic's jumpsuit. His gray hair was slicked back with what looked like motor oil. Even from a distance, Danny could see the man's hands moving in strange, repetitive gestures. The second figure was harder to make out. Shorter, wearing what appeared to be a long coat that hung loosely on a skeletal frame. Danny tried to ignore them, focusing on checking his trailer connections, but every time he glanced their direction, they seemed to have moved closer, though he never actually saw them walking. It was like they were drifting across the asphalt. When Danny walked around to the driver's side of his cab, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Someone had rubbed something on the side of his trailer. The substance looked like grease or oil, but it had an iridescent quality that seemed to shift and shimmer in the light. The marks formed a pattern that hurt Danny's eyes to look at directly, geometric shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves. The smell was indescribable, like rotting meat mixed with ozone and something else that reminded him of his grandmother's flooded basement. "Hey!" Danny hollered at the 2 figures. "What the hell are you doing to my truck?" The man in the jumpsuit looked up and smiled. His teeth were far too white, far too sharp. Without breaking eye contact, he began walking toward Danny with a gait that was somehow both casual and predatory. His companion followed. And as she moved into the light, Danny saw that what he'd mistaken for a coat was actually her skin, pale, translucent flesh that hung in loose folds around her emaciated frame. Danny backed toward his cab, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol in his door panel. "Now hold on there, friend," the man called out, his voice carrying an accent Danny couldn't place. "We're just trying to help you out. Your rig's got some bad energy around it. We're trying to cleanse it for you." Danny climbed into his cab and locked the door. The woman appeared at his passenger window, pressing her face against the glass. Her breath fogged the window as she smiled, revealing gums black with decay and teeth filed to points. The man jumped up on the driver's side and began licking the window with a tongue that was far too long and covered in small barbs. His eyes never left Danny's face. "Open up, driver," the woman said, her voice muffled but audible. "We just want to talk about your cargo. We know what you're really hauling. We can help you dispose of it properly." Danny's cargo manifest listed agricultural equipment. But as the woman spoke, he began remembering strange details about the loading process he dismissed at the time. The warehouse workers had been unusually secretive. The paperwork had been rushed. The payment had been in cash. The truck began to rock as both figures pounded on the windows with increasing intensity. The woman used her fists, leaving bloody smears on the glass. The man had produced a crowbar from somewhere in his jumpsuit. "Let us in," the man screamed, his voice rising to an inhuman pitch. "We know you can hear them calling. The cargo is alive, and it wants to come home." As if summoned by his words, Danny began to hear sounds from his trailer, scratching, scraping noises like fingernails on metal, whispered conversations in a language he didn't recognize. The trailer began to sway, as if something large was moving inside it. Danny fumbled for his keys and started the engine. As the truck lurched forward, he saw the man fall to the asphalt. But the woman held on, her fingers somehow finding purchase on the smooth metal of the doorframe. She rode alongside the cab for nearly a quarter mile, her face pressed against the passenger window, her mouth moving in what looked like a silent chant. Her eyes had turned completely black. Finally, she let go and tumbled into the darkness. But her laughter followed the truck for miles down the highway. Danny drove without stopping until he reached Sacramento. When he arrived at the delivery site, his trailer was empty. The agricultural equipment that had been loaded in Phoenix was gone. Only strange burn marks remained on the trailer floor and that lingering smell of ozone and decay. The shipping company claimed no knowledge of the missing cargo. The insurance investigation turned up nothing. The warehouse in Phoenix had been abandoned for months, according to local authorities. The paperwork Danny had signed bore the names of people who didn't exist. Weeks later, Danny was watching the evening news when he saw a report about disappearances in small farming communities throughout California's Central Valley. Entire families had vanished overnight, leaving behind empty houses and fields stripped bare of all vegetation. Witnesses reported strange lights moving through the affected areas, sounds that defied description. Danny knew with absolute certainty that whatever he'd been hauling that night was connected to these disappearances. The woman and her companion hadn't been trying to rob him. They'd been trying to stop something far worse from reaching its destination. And he had delivered it right into the heart of California's agricultural region, where it could spread and multiply among isolated farms and rural communities. Sometimes, late at night when driving through farming areas, Danny sees lights moving through the fields, hears sounds that remind him of that terrible night at the Moonlight Truck Plaza. He learned to avoid certain routes, certain truck stops, certain shipping companies that paid too well for jobs that seemed too simple. Because he knows now that not all cargo is what it appears to be, and not all deliveries are meant for human recipients. Rick was driving through rural Montana at 4:30 a.m. when he saw something that made him ease off the accelerator. There, sprawled across both lanes of the highway, was what appeared to be a human body. Rick's military training kicked in. He scanned the area for potential threats while slowing his rig. Ambushes were rare on American highways, but not unheard of. He grabbed his CB radio, but remembered he was in a dead zone where no signals could get through. As he got closer, Rick could see the figure was lying face down in an unnatural position, arms and legs splayed at odd angles that suggested severe injury or death. Rick brought his truck to a stop about 50 feet from the body, leaving his engine running and headlights trained on the scene. He grabbed his flashlight and pistol, then stepped out into the cold Montana night. "Hello? Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. No movement. Rick moved closer, his flashlight beam dancing across the asphalt. The closer he got, the more wrong everything seemed. The body was positioned too perfectly, too deliberately. The limbs were spread in a pattern that almost looked ritualistic. There were no skid marks to suggest a vehicle accident. Most disturbing, Rick couldn't see any blood, despite the apparent trauma. When Rick was about 10 feet away, he stopped and played his flashlight over the entire scene. The figure was definitely human, but the proportions seemed off. The torso was too long, the limbs too thin, the head positioned at an angle that should have been impossible. That's when he noticed the smell, not blood. Something worse. The sickly sweet odor of advanced decomposition mixed with chemicals that burned his nostrils. The body had been there for days, maybe weeks, but it looked fresh, as if death had occurred only hours ago. Rick backed away, instincts screaming that this was a trap. As he retreated toward his truck, Rick heard a sound that made his blood freeze, a wet, sliding noise, like something large moving across the asphalt. He spun around, flashlight sweeping across the road. The body was exactly where he'd left it. The sound came again. Closer. Rick ran back to his cab and climbed inside, locking the doors. He grabbed his CB radio and tried calling for help, broadcasting on the emergency channel even though he knew he was in a dead zone. "Mayday, Mayday, this is eastbound on Highway 200, mile marker 47. I've got a possible fatality in the roadway, and there's something wrong here, something really wrong." Static. No response. Rick looked back at the body and saw something that made him question his sanity. The figure was moving, not like a living person trying to get up, like something being dragged or manipulated by an unseen force. The limbs twitched and jerked in unnatural ways. The head began to turn slowly toward his truck. When the face came into view, Rick saw that it wasn't human at all. The features were wrong, too sharp, too angular. Eyes that reflected his, headlights like an animal's. The mouth open in what might have been a scream, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The skin had a waxy, artificial quality, as if it were a mask designed to fool observers from a distance. The thing that had been masquerading as a human corpse began to move with increasing coordination, first pushing itself up on its arms, then rising to its feet with fluid grace that defied anatomy. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, limbs elongated and twisted, head cocked at an impossible angle as it studied Rick's truck with those terrible glowing eyes. Rick threw his transmission into gear and floored the accelerator. In his mirrors, he could see the creature watching him leave, standing motionless in the middle of the highway. But as the distance increased, Rick realized with growing horror that the thing was following him. It didn't run or walk. It simply appeared closer with each glance in the mirror, covering impossible distances in the blink of an eye. The creature moved with a stuttering, stop-motion quality, like frames missing from an old film. One moment it would be a quarter-mile behind, the next only a few hundred yards away. The chase continued for miles, the creature maintaining its impossible pursuit while Rick pushed his truck to its limits. The engine temperature climbed dangerously high. He could smell burning oil and overheated metal. Just as Rick thought his engine would seize, he crested a hill and saw lights spread out in the valley below. A small town. He began laying on his horn, flashing his headlights, trying to wake anyone who might help. As soon as his truck crossed the town limits, the creature vanished. Rick pulled into an all-night diner and sat in his cab for nearly an hour, shaking, trying to process what had happened. When he finally called the local sheriff's department, they sent a deputy to take his statement. But the officer clearly thought Rick was drunk or hallucinating from too many hours on the road. "Sir, we get calls like this maybe once or twice a year. Long-haul drivers, isolated highways, sleep deprivation. It's a perfect recipe for seeing things that aren't there." But Rick knew what he'd seen. The next day, he drove back to mile marker 47 with a state trooper. They found nothing. No body, no evidence of any disturbance, just empty highway stretching through the forest. Rick never drove that stretch of highway again. He took longer routes that added hours to his trips but kept him on busier roads. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, using isolated highways to hunt for victims. Over the following months, Rick researched similar incidents and found a disturbing pattern. Truckers across the country had reported encounters with bodies in the road that turned out to be something else entirely. Things that used human appearance as camouflage to lure people into stopping. Most reports were dismissed as hallucinations or hoaxes. But Rick knew better. The creatures were real, and they were using America's highway system as their hunting ground, exploiting human compassion to get close to their prey. Michael was driving through northern Idaho on a frigid February night when the paranoia started. At first, it was just a feeling, that nagging sense that something wasn't right. But as the miles accumulated and the snow continued to fall, the feeling grew into a certainty. He was being watched, followed, hunted. In his mirrors, Michael caught glimpses of movement between the trees, dark shapes that seemed to pace his truck, maintaining the same speed despite the difficult terrain. The CB radio had been silent for hours, which wasn't unusual in this remote area, where mountains blocked most transmissions. But tonight, the silence felt oppressive, as if something was actively jamming the frequencies. His satellite phone showed no signal. His cell phone had lost coverage miles ago. Michael was completely cut off. The first direct sign of trouble came when Michael noticed tracks in the snow alongside the highway, large prints, easily twice the size of human footprints, with a stride length that suggested something moving at incredible speed. What made Michael's blood run cold was realizing the tracks were fresh, made within the last few minutes based on how little snow had accumulated in them. Whatever was making them was keeping pace with his truck. Michael pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing his loaded rig faster than was safe on the icy mountain road. But the tracks multiplied. What had been one set became two, then four, then too many to count. They crisscrossed the highway, disappeared into the forest, reappeared on the other side, suggesting a pack coordinating their movements, surrounding his truck. The attack came without warning. Something large struck the passenger side of his cab with tremendous force, rocking the entire truck and spider-webbing the window. Michael fought to maintain control as the truck skidded toward the guardrail, the trailer jackknifing slightly before he straightened it out. In that brief moment, Michael caught a glimpse of something that defied description. Roughly humanoid in shape, but covered in thick, dark fur that glistened with ice crystals. Limbs disproportionately long and muscular, a face that combined human and animal features in a way that suggested intelligence behind the predatory instincts. The creature landed in the snow beside the road and immediately began running alongside Michael's truck, its powerful legs carrying it effortlessly through deep powder. More creatures emerged from the forest, appearing on both sides of the highway like ghosts materializing from the swirling snow. They ran in formation, communicating through howls that echoed off the canyon walls. Michael counted at least 6 of them. One leapt onto his trailer, claws finding purchase despite the ice. Michael could hear it moving across the roof, its weight causing the suspension to groan. He grabbed his CB radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is northbound on Highway 95, mile marker unknown. I'm under attack by unknown hostiles. Request immediate assistance. Static. No response. The creature on his trailer began working its way forward, trying to reach his fuel tanks. If it punctured them, he'd be stranded with no heat, no power, no escape. Michael began swerving back and forth, trying to shake it loose. The maneuver was dangerous on the icy road. He could feel the trailer sliding toward the canyon edge with each turn, but the creature held on with inhuman strength, claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. That's when Michael noticed something terrifying. The creatures weren't just hunting him randomly, they were herding him, forcing him toward a specific destination. Every time he tried to change direction, they appeared to block his path, leaving him no choice but to continue on the road they wanted. This wasn't a random attack, it was a coordinated trap. These creatures were intelligent, organized, experienced in hunting vehicles on these mountain roads. They knew the terrain, they knew the weather, and they knew exactly how to isolate their prey. Michael pushed his truck to its absolute limits. The pack closed in, creatures running alongside both sides, more visible in the forest ahead, moving with perfect coordination like a military unit. Just as Michael crested a hill, he saw what they'd been herding him toward. The highway ahead was blocked by a massive tree that had been deliberately felled across both lanes, positioned at the perfect height to stop a truck without destroying it completely. They'd been planning this trap, waiting for the right victim. Michael had seconds to decide. He could try to stop before hitting the tree, but that would leave him trapped while the creatures closed in. He could ram through, but his truck probably wasn't powerful enough, and the impact would disable his vehicle. Instead, Michael chose a third option. He aimed his truck at the guardrail on the right side, hoping to break through and escape down the mountainside. It was suicidal, but it was better than being captured alive. The impact was tremendous. The metal barrier held for a moment, then gave way with a screech of twisted steel. Michael's truck plunged over the edge. For several terrifying seconds, he was in freefall, the truck tumbling through space while he fought to stay conscious. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of snow, trees, and stars. His truck crashed into a grove of pine trees about 30 feet below the highway. The branches absorbed much of the impact, preventing the vehicle from continuing its fall into deeper parts of the canyon. Michael was thrown around the cab like a rag doll, but his seatbelt kept him from being killed outright. When the world stopped spinning, he found himself hanging upside down, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, entire body aching. His truck was wedged between several large trees, cab tilted at a crazy angle but still intact. The engine had died, but the electrical system still worked. Lights and heat. Above him, Michael could hear the creatures moving along the canyon edge, their calls echoing as they searched for a way to reach him. But the steep slope and dense trees made it difficult for them to descend. Michael spent the rest of the night huddled in his cab, using emergency supplies to stay warm while waiting for dawn. The creatures continued their vigil, but as hours passed, their calls became less frequent, more distant. By the time the sun rose, they had disappeared entirely, leaving only tracks in the snow. Rescue came 12 hours later when a search helicopter spotted his wreckage. The official report blamed the accident on weather and driver fatigue. No mention of creatures. Michael's account was dismissed as hallucination from trauma and hypothermia. But Michael knew what he'd experienced. The creatures were still out there, still hunting, still using the isolation of remote highways to trap drivers. They were intelligent, organized, patient, capable of planning operations that took weeks to execute. Michael never drove the Idaho mountain roads again. He warned other truckers, but most dismissed his story. The smart ones, though, the experienced drivers who'd learned to trust their instincts, began avoiding certain routes and traveling in convoys. They understood that the highway was home to predators no safety manual could prepare you for. And somewhere in the Idaho mountains, in a canyon where snow never completely melts, the wreckage of Michael's truck still rests among the pines, a monument to the night when quick thinking and desperate courage allowed him to escape something that should not exist. The wilderness never sleeps, and neither do the things that hunt in its deepest corners. Marcus pulled his Mack truck to a stop on the shoulder of Interstate 75 in Georgia. It was 2:15 a.m. on a sweltering August night, and something had forced him to pull over. Not mechanical trouble, not fatigue, something far more unsettling. For the past 50 miles, Marcus had been seeing figures walking along the highway shoulder. At first, he dismissed them as hitchhikers or stranded motorists. But as the sightings became more frequent, he began noticing disturbing patterns. The figures all walked in the same direction, moving north against the flow of traffic with a purposeful, measured gait that never varied. They appeared to be people of all ages, elderly men in hospital gowns, middle-aged women in nurse uniforms, children in pajamas, teenagers in school uniforms, but they all shared certain characteristics that made Marcus's skin crawl. None of them ever looked at approaching vehicles or attempted to flag down help. They walked with their heads held high, staring straight ahead with expressions of serene contentment. Most disturbing, they cast no shadows despite the bright illumination from Marcus's headlights. Marcus had encountered his first shoulder walker about an hour earlier near Valdosta. An elderly woman in a faded hospital gown, shuffling along the gravel shoulder. His first instinct had been to stop and offer help, but something about the woman's posture triggered his survival instincts. As he'd slowed and pulled toward the shoulder, the woman had turned to look directly at him. Her face was pale and waxy, eyes that reflected his headlights like an animal's. She smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. She raised one bony hand in what might have been a greeting or a summons. Marcus had accelerated past her, heart pounding. In his mirrors, he'd watched her return to her measured walk as if nothing had happened. Since then, Marcus had counted at least 24 more shoulder walkers, all moving north with the same purposeful stride. Now parked with his hazard lights flashing, Marcus grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is southbound I-75 at mile marker 42. Anyone else seeing pedestrians on the shoulder tonight?" A gravelly voice responded. "Yeah, I copy. Been seeing them for the past 100 miles. Strangest damn thing. They just keep walking no matter what." Another voice joined. "This is northbound at marker 67. I've been tracking these people for 2 hours. Counted over 40, all heading the same direction. Tried to stop and help a little girl in a nightgown, but she just looked right through me like I wasn't there." Marcus keyed his mic. "Anyone know where they're going?" "Negative. But I'll tell you what's got me spooked. I passed the same old man 3 times tonight. Same clothes, same walk. Either there's a bunch of identical people out here, or something ain't right." The conversation continued, with truckers sharing increasingly disturbing observations. Some reported seeing the same individuals, multiple times over hours or days. Others described encounters where the walkers had suddenly appeared directly in front of their trucks, forcing emergency stops, only to vanish moments later. Marcus decided to investigate. He started driving slowly northward, watching for the next figure. About 5 miles up the road, his headlights illuminated a man in his 40s, wearing a business suit that looked expensive, but was now stained and torn. The man walked with the same measured pace, briefcase swinging at his side. Marcus pulled alongside and rolled down his passenger window. "Hey, buddy, you need a ride?" The man turned to look at Marcus. His face was pale and gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. His mouth was set in a slight smile. His eyes held an emptiness that suggested no one was home. "Thank you for your concern," the man said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "But I have somewhere I need to be. We all do." "Where are you going?" Marcus asked. The man's smile widened. North, always north, to the place where the walking ends and the real work begins. Marcus felt a chill. What kind of work? The kind that requires fresh volunteers. People like you who stop to help strangers. People who ask too many questions. The man's eyes began to glow with faint phosphorescent light. Marcus could see his pupils had elongated into vertical slits. The smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. Marcus floored the accelerator, his truck lurching forward as he fled. In his mirrors, he could see the man standing motionless on the shoulder, watching with those terrible glowing eyes. But as distance increased, Marcus realized with horror that the figure was somehow keeping pace, moving without appearing to walk or run. His CB crackled with a voice Marcus recognized as the businessman's, though he was now miles away. "You can't outrun us, Marcus. We know your name, your route, your destination. We've been watching you, waiting for the right moment to extend our invitation." Marcus grabbed his mic. "How do you know my name? What do you want?" "We want you to join us, to become part of something larger. The walking is just the beginning, a way to sort out those who are ready from those who aren't. You've shown curiosity, compassion, willingness to help strangers. These are valuable qualities." "What line of work?" Marcus demanded. "Recruitment. We're always looking for new team members. People who understand the importance of helping others find their true purpose. The shoulder is our interview process." Marcus realized with dawning horror that the shoulder walkers weren't victims. They were recruiters, agents of some larger organization that used the highway system to identify and collect potential members. The walking was psychological testing, designed to attract people who would stop to help strangers. What happens to people who join you? They find peace. No more worries about deadlines, fuel costs, mechanical breakdowns. No more loneliness, just satisfaction of meaningful work and companionship. Marcus looked in his mirrors and saw shoulder walkers appearing in greater numbers, emerging from the tree line on both sides of the highway. They moved with increasing coordination, forming groups that herded his truck toward some predetermined destination. The businessman's voice returned, now on multiple channels simultaneously. "You're approaching the collection point, Marcus. Don't be afraid. The transition is painless. Most people find it rather liberating." Ahead, the highway curved right. Marcus could see lights in the distance that didn't look like normal traffic. As he got closer, he realized it was a massive gathering of shoulder walkers, hundreds of figures standing in perfect formation across both lanes, blocking all traffic. They stood with military precision, arranged in rows that stretched from median to outer shoulders, all facing Marcus's approaching truck, all wearing the same serene smile. Their eyes glowed with phosphorescent light, creating a constellation of unblinking stars. Marcus hit his brakes and stopped about 50 yards from the assembled crowd. He could see other vehicles scattered among the walkers. Cars, trucks, motorcycles that had apparently been stopped by previous gatherings. Some of the drivers were now standing among the walkers, having joined their ranks. The businessman appeared at Marcus's driver's side window. Up close, his inhuman nature was apparent. Translucent skin revealed dark veins, movements too fluid for normal anatomy. "Welcome to the end of your journey, Marcus, and the beginning of your real purpose. Step out and let us show you what you've been missing." Marcus looked at the assembled crowd and realized many faces were familiar. Truckers he'd known for years, drivers who had vanished from CB channels without explanation. They all wore the same peaceful expression, the same empty smile. The temptation was overwhelming. Marcus was tired of the loneliness, tired of endless miles and constant pressure. The idea of joining a community where all worries disappeared was incredibly appealing. But something deep in his core rebelled. Marcus had always been independent, always valued freedom above security. The thought of surrendering his will, no matter how peaceful it might be, filled him with revulsion. Instead of opening his door, Marcus threw his truck into reverse and began backing away. The shoulder walkers immediately moved toward him, serene expressions never changing, but pace increasing dramatically. They moved with inhuman speed, flowing around obstacles while maintaining formation. Marcus spun his truck in a dangerous U-turn and began driving south, back the way he'd come. In his mirrors, he could see the entire gathering pursuing him, moving as a single organism. They didn't run or walk. They simply flowed forward with speed that defied physics. The chase continued for miles. The shoulder walkers maintaining pursuit while the businessman's voice provided commentary through the CB. You're only delaying the inevitable. We have agents throughout the highway system, every truck stop, every way station. You can't drive forever, and when you stop, we'll be waiting. Marcus realized the businessman was right. He couldn't outrun an organization that had infiltrated the entire trucking infrastructure. As dawn broke over Georgia, the shoulder walkers gradually fell behind and disappeared, as if daylight weakened their ability to maintain pursuit. Marcus continued driving until he reached Florida, where he finally felt safe enough to stop and call for help. But when he tried to report the incident, no one would believe him. The Georgia State Police had no record of unusual activity. The trucking company insisted all drivers were accounted for. Marcus realized the shoulder walkers organization was sophisticated enough to cover up their activities and manipulate records. From that night forward, Marcus never drove alone on isolated highways after dark. He traveled in convoys and carried multiple forms of communication. Most importantly, he never stopped to help strangers walking along the highway shoulder, no matter how much his conscience urged him to. Because Marcus had learned that sometimes the people who appear to need help most are the ones you should fear most. The shoulder walkers were still out there, still recruiting, still adding to their ranks one compassionate driver at a time. And somewhere on a dark Georgia highway, they continue their endless march northward, searching for the next trucker who will make the fatal mistake of stopping to offer assistance to a stranger in the night. The banging started at exactly 2:47 a.m., jolting Derek awake in his sleeper compartment, 3 thunderous impacts against the right side of his Kenworth, each powerful enough to rock the entire 40-ton rig. Derek's first thought was another truck had sideswiped him. But as he sat up and listened to the silence that followed, he realized something stranger was happening. Derek had been parked at this Pennsylvania rest area for less than 2 hours, catching his mandatory break before continuing from Pittsburgh to Boston. The lot was nearly empty except for 2 other rigs about 100 yards ahead. A red Freightliner and a white Volvo, both with running lights glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The rest area was one of those forgotten places Pennsylvania DOT had built in the 70s and barely maintained since. Cracked picnic tables, filthy restrooms, a single flickering streetlight casting weak yellow light. Derek grabbed his flashlight and peered out his passenger window, expecting damage, but the side of his trailer looked perfectly normal. No dents, no scratches. The banging came again, this time from the left side. 3 more impacts, perfectly spaced, delivered with tremendous force. The cab shook. Derek could hear his coffee mug rattling, but when he looked out his driver's window, he saw nothing. Derek grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is the Kenworth in the back. Anyone else hearing loud banging?" A gravelly voice responded. "Yeah, I copy. Been hearing it for 10 minutes. Something's pounding on all our trucks, but I can't see what's doing it." A younger voice joined. "This is the white Volvo. Whatever it is, it's moving between our rigs. I saw something dark pass my windshield, but too fast to make out." Derek felt a chill. "Anyone got eyes on what we're dealing with?" "Negative, but I've been driving 23 years, and I ain't never experienced nothing like this. It's like something's testing our trucks, checking if we're awake." The banging resumed, striking all 3 trucks simultaneously. Derek could hear the impacts echoing across the rest area, as whatever was out there attacked each vehicle with methodical precision. The sound was deafening, like someone swinging a sledgehammer. But there was a rhythm that suggested intelligence. Derek decided to investigate. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his baseball bat, then quietly opened his door and stepped into the night. The air was thick with humidity and diesel exhaust. He could hear distant traffic on the interstate, but the rest area itself was eerily quiet, as if whatever had been making noise had suddenly stopped. Derek walked around his truck, playing his flashlight across every surface. The metal was unmarked, but Derek noticed something that made his skin crawl. Handprints on the side of his trailer, dozens of them pressed into the metal as if the aluminum had been soft clay. The prints were human in shape, but wrong in size. Fingers too long, palms too narrow, arranged in patterns that suggested the creature had far more than the normal number of hands. Derek's flashlight swept across the ground. Footprints in the dirt showed a bipedal creature with feet at least 18 inches long, equipped with claws instead of toes. The stride length was nearly 6 feet. His CB crackled. "Hey guys, I think I see it. Something moving between the trees at the edge of the lot. It's big, maybe 8 or 9 feet tall, and it's watching us." Derek turned his flashlight toward the tree line and saw eyes reflecting the beam back at him, positioned too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal, with intelligence that was unmistakably aware. As Derek watched, the eyes moved laterally through the trees, circling the rest area like a predator studying prey. "I see it too," Derek called into his radio. "Whatever it is, it's been checking out our trucks. There are handprints all over my trailer. Footprints suggest something that ain't natural." The older driver's voice came through. "Boys, I think we need to get out of here. I've heard stories about things that hunt truckers at remote rest areas. They test your defenses first, see if you're awake. Then they make their move." Derek was about to respond when the banging resumed with renewed intensity, but this time it wasn't random impacts. The creature was pounding out a rhythm, a complex pattern that sounded almost like communication. The beats echoed off surrounding trees and seemed to be answered by similar sounds from deeper in the forest. "There's more than one," Derek realized. "They're talking to each other." The eyes in the tree line multiplied, becoming a constellation of reflected light that surrounded the rest area. Derek counted at least a dozen pairs, all positioned at the same unnatural height. The creatures were coordinating their approach, using darkness and superior numbers to their advantage. The banging stopped, replaced by something more terrifying, the scraping of claws against metal as the creatures began climbing onto the trucks. Derek could hear them moving across trailer roofs, weight causing suspension to creak. They moved with surprising stealth, clawed feet finding purchase on smooth metal. Derek ran back to his cab and climbed inside, locking the doors. Through his windshield, he could see dark shapes moving across the other trucks, silhouetted against the weak glow of the streetlight. The creatures were humanoid in general shape, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent in ways human joints couldn't accommodate. One dropped down from the Freightliner's roof and landed directly in front of Derek's truck. In the harsh glare of his headlights, he got his first clear look. The thing stood nearly 9 feet tall with gray, mottled skin, arms disproportionately long, reaching almost to the ground, ending in hands with too many fingers tipped with claws. The face was most disturbing, vaguely human but stretched and distorted, eyes large and completely black, mouth filled with teeth suited for tearing meat. The creature tilted its head as it studied Derek's truck, moving with curious intensity. It approached the driver's side door and began tapping on the window with one elongated finger, sharp and rhythmic, like Morse code. Derek grabbed his CB. "They're right outside our trucks. I can see one clearly, and it's not human. We need to get out now." "Agreed," the Freightliner driver replied. "On my count, 3, 2, 1, go!" Derek turned his key. The engine roared to life. But relief was short-lived. The creature at his door didn't flee. Instead, it began pounding on his window with increasing intensity, claws leaving scratches in safety glass. Derek threw his transmission into gear and began moving forward, but the creature kept pace, running alongside the cab with inhuman speed. More beings emerged from the trees and began pursuing the 3 trucks as they fled the rest area, their long legs covered ground with loping strides like wolves chasing prey. The chase continued onto the interstate, the creatures maintaining pursuit despite increasing speed. They ran in formation, communicating through clicks and whistles. Some attempted to leap onto moving trucks, claws scraping against metal. Derek pushed his truck to maximum speed, engine temperature climbing dangerously. In his mirrors, he could see the creatures falling behind, endurance finally reaching limits. But he didn't slow down until he reached the next truck stop, a brightly lit facility with plenty of other vehicles and people. The 3 drivers met in the restaurant, comparing experiences. All their trucks showed evidence of attack, handprints, claw marks, dents from the creature's attempts to break in. When they tried to report the incident, no one believed them. The Pennsylvania State Police took statements, but clearly considered the report a product of overactive imaginations. Security cameras had malfunctioned during the time when the chase occurred, leaving no visual evidence. Derek never stopped at that rest area again and warned other truckers to avoid it. But he knew the creatures were still out there, still hunting, still testing the defenses of drivers who parked in isolated locations. The banging in the night wasn't random. It was a test, a way for the creatures to determine which trucks contained alert, armed drivers and which held easy prey. And somewhere in the Pennsylvania darkness, at a forgotten rest area most maps don't show, the creatures continue their nocturnal hunts, waiting for the next group of truckers who will make the fatal mistake of stopping in the wrong place. Tony was navigating his Peterbilt through remote Wyoming wilderness on a frigid February night when his CB radio crackled with a transmission that made him sit up straight. The voice was female, young, filled with terror. "Please, somebody help me. I'm trapped in a truck at mile marker 235. He's coming back, and I don't think I can hide much longer. If anyone can hear this, please call the police." Tony grabbed his microphone. "This is eastbound on I-80. I copy your transmission. What's your location, and what help do you need?" Silence for several seconds. Then the woman's voice returned, more frightened. "I don't know exactly where I am. I was hitchhiking and this trucker picked me up. But something's wrong with him. He's not normal. I managed to lock myself in the sleeper compartment, but he knows I'm in here." Tony checked his GPS. Mile marker 235 was still 15 miles ahead. He pressed the accelerator, pushing his truck faster than was safe on the icy highway. "What's your name, miss?" "I'm Tony, and I'm heading your way. Can you describe the truck?" "My name is Sarah. It's a blue Peterbilt with flames painted on the sides. The driver said his name was Carl, but when I looked at his logbook, it had a different name. And his eyes... God, his eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils. Just black." Tony felt a chill. "Sarah, I need you to stay calm and keep that door locked. I'll be there in about 10 minutes, and I'm calling the state police now." He reached for his satellite phone, but the call wouldn't go through. The display showed no signal. Impossible for a satellite phone designed to work anywhere on Earth. He tried his CB to call for help from other truckers. Breaker, this is eastbound I-80 at mile marker 220. I've got a female in distress at marker 235. Requesting immediate assistance from any units in the area." Static. No response. It was as if every communication device had suddenly stopped working. Sarah's voice returned, more panicked. "He's back. He's trying to get into the sleeper. Oh God, he's not using the door handle. He's doing something to the metal. It's bending like it's made of clay." Tony could hear sounds in the background, a low humming like an electrical transformer, accompanied by what sounded like metal being twisted. Sarah, can you see anything? Is there a weapon you can use? There's a crowbar under the bunk, but I don't think it would help. Tony, this thing isn't human. I can see its shadow through the curtain, and it's too tall, too thin. And the smell. It smells like burning copper and rotting meat. Tony crested a hill and saw lights ahead, a truck parked on the shoulder with hazard lights flashing. As he got closer, he saw it matched Sarah's description, a blue Peterbilt with flame decals. But something was wrong with the truck's appearance. The metal seemed to be moving, rippling like water. The flames painted on the sides appeared to be actually burning, casting flickering shadows. The trailer swayed back and forth despite no wind strong enough to move a semi-trailer. Tony pulled to a stop about 100 yards away and grabbed his shotgun. "Sarah, I'm here. I can see the truck. I'm coming to get you out." "No," Sarah's voice screamed. "Don't come closer. It's not just the driver. The whole truck is wrong. It's alive somehow, and it's hungry. I can feel it trying to get inside my head, trying to make me open the door." As Tony watched, the blue Peterbilt began to change more dramatically. The cab stretched and elongated, taking on organic quality. What had appeared to be chrome exhaust stacks were now writhing like tentacles. The windshield had become a cluster of black eyes that reflected his headlights with malevolent intelligence. The grille had transformed into a mouth filled with rows of metallic teeth. The headlights pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat. The diesel engine's rumble had become something closer to a growl. "Sarah, where are you in that thing? I need to know exactly so I can get you out." "I'm in the sleeper compartment, but it's changing too. The walls are getting softer. I can feel them pressing in on me. Tony, I don't think this is a truck at all. I think it's something that looks like a truck to fool people." Tony realized with horror that Sarah was right. The creature had evolved perfect camouflage for hunting on America's highways, appearing to be a normal semi-truck complete with human driver, allowing it to pick up hitchhikers without arousing suspicion. By the time victims realized what they were dealing with, they were already trapped inside its body. The creature began moving toward Tony's truck, not rolling on wheels, but flowing across the asphalt like a massive slug. Its transformation accelerated, with more tentacles emerging from the trailer and bioluminescent patterns appearing along its sides. Tony threw his truck into reverse and began backing away. Tentacles shot out, wrapping around his front bumper, trying to drag him closer to that terrible mouth. He could hear Sarah screaming through the radio as the creature's digestive processes began working on the sleeper compartment. "Tony, help me! It's dissolving the walls. I can see outside, but everything looks wrong. Like I'm inside a stomach." Tony floored the accelerator, his engine straining against the creature's grip. The tentacles stretched and elongated, but finally snapped, allowing him to break free. In his mirrors, he could see the creature writhing, its disguise completely abandoned as it revealed its true form. The thing was enormous, easily the size of a city bus. Body that seemed part machine, part organic tissue. Cables and wires hung from its underside like intestines. Its surface was covered in license plates from dozens of states, trophies from previous victims. Tony drove for 20 miles before his communication equipment started working again. He immediately called 911. The dispatcher was skeptical, but agreed to send a patrol car. When state police arrived at mile marker 235, they found nothing. No truck, no evidence. The official report listed Tony's call as possible hallucination from fatigue. But Tony knew what he'd seen, and he knew Sarah was still out there somewhere, trapped inside a creature that used the highway system as its hunting ground. He began researching similar incidents and found a disturbing pattern of missing hitchhikers along major trucking routes. The creature was still out there, still hunting, still perfecting its disguise. It had learned to mimic not just truck appearance but driver behavior, complete with CB chatter and proper documentation. Most victims never realized they were in danger until too late. Tony started carrying more weapons and warning other truckers about picking up hitchhikers, especially on isolated highways, but he knew his warnings would only do so much. The creature was intelligent, adaptable, patient. It could wait years between hunts. Somewhere on America's highways, a truck that isn't really a truck continues to prowl the darkness, and inside its body, the voices of previous prey echo through the static, calling for help that will never come. Some say these stories ended that night, but the drivers who lived through them still wake up screaming. Thanks for listening, if you made it through the darkness. If you've ever experienced something that defied explanation on the road, share your story in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe to keep these stories alive, because the highway never sleeps, and neither do the things that hunt along its edges.